You're driving home after dinner or a long day when your rearview mirror suddenly explodes in red and blue. Surprised, your stomach tightens. You check your speed. You mentally replay the last mile. Was that turn too fast? Did you miss a signal? You pull over, your hands a little too tight on the wheel, trying to stay calm. The officer walks up, calm but direct. You exchange the basics. Then comes the question that changes everything. Any weapons in the vehicle? It sounds simple, almost casual. But it's not small talk, it's a pivot point. Because if you answer the way most people do, honestly, openly, trying to be helpful, you may have just handed over the legal and psychological leverage that turns a routine traffic stop into something much bigger. The moment a firearm enters the conversation, the entire tone can shift. You might be asked to step out of the car. You might be separated from your vehicle. Your weapon might be secured. Suddenly, what felt like a minor traffic issue starts to feel like an investigation. What most people don't realize is this: the danger usually isn't in being a lawful gun owner. The danger is in saying the wrong thing, at the wrong time, in the wrong state, without understanding how your answer can expand the officer's options. There is one calm, clear sentence that can protect your rights without making you look paranoid or hostile. But whether you say it, and when you say it, depends entirely on where you are and what your legal obligations are there. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly how to handle that moment so you don't accidentally talk your way into a search, an extended stop, or something worse. Hi, I'm Artur, and on Immigration Monitor, I break down real-world legal encounters so you know how to protect yourself calmly, confidently, and intelligently. This isn't about being anti-police, and it isn't about being reckless with your rights. It's about understanding how roadside encounters actually work, psychologically and legally, so you don't make a permanent mistake in a temporary moment. If you're a lawful gun owner, or even if you're not but you want to understand your rights during a traffic stop, what we're about to cover could help you avoid unnecessary escalation. We're going to talk about when you must disclose a firearm, when you don't, why that any weapons question matters so much, and the exact words you should use to protect yourself without creating extra tension. Because the side of the road is not where you win arguments, it's where you avoid extra charges. And once you understand the structure behind that one question, you'll never hear it the same way again. Before we get into firearms, we need to clear up something that causes more problems than almost anything else during a traffic stop: misunderstanding what you actually owe the officer. When you're lawfully pulled over, you are generally required to provide your driver's license, your vehicle registration, and proof of insurance if requested. That's not optional. That's not a constitutional debate. That's the legal baseline. This is where some people wreck their own situation immediately by trying to argue roadside constitutional theory. You've probably heard someone say, "I'm not engaged in commerce," or "I'm traveling, not driving," or "I don't need a license because I have a right to travel." Let's clear that up right now. The constitutional right to travel is about moving freely between states and being treated equally under the law. It is not a loophole that lets you operate a motor vehicle without following licensing laws. Trying to run that argument on the side of the road doesn't make you look informed. It makes you look obstructive. That's how a simple traffic stop turns into refusal to identify, obstruction, or worse. The roadside is not a courtroom. It's not a debate stage. It's a controlled environment where the officer has legal authority over the stop, and your goal is simple: comply physically, protect yourself verbally. That means provide the required documents. Keep your movements slow and visible. If it's dark, turn on your interior light. Keep your hands on the wheel. If your registration is in the glove box, say clearly, "My registration is in the glove box. How would you like me to proceed?" Then move only after they respond. Narrating your movements does two things. It keeps the encounter calm, and it makes it much harder for anyone later to say you were making suspicious movements. Calm, visible, predictable, that's the mindset. Because once the basics are handled, that's when the stop either stays routine or shifts into something else entirely. And that shift usually starts with one question: Any weapons in the vehicle? Here's where most people have no idea that the right answer depends on geography. In the United States, firearm disclosure laws generally fall into three broad categories. If you carry, you need to know which category your state falls into before you ever see flashing lights in your mirror. The first category is commonly called duty to inform. In these states, if you are carrying a firearm, especially under a permit, you are legally required to inform the officer during a lawful stop. That disclosure is built into the legal framework for carrying there. The second category is inform if asked. In these states, you might not have to volunteer the information up front, but if the officer directly asks whether you have a weapon, you may be legally obligated to answer truthfully. The third category is no duty to disclose. In these states, unless some separate legal requirement is triggered by your specific situation, you are not required to tell the officer that you're carrying. Now here's the part that matters more than people realize. Even in a state where you have no duty to disclose, the moment the officer becomes aware that a firearm is present, the nature of the stop often changes. It doesn't change because you've done something wrong. It changes because of human psychology and police training. The presence of a firearm, even a completely legal one, raises the perceived stakes of the encounter. That raised risk affects tone, positioning, instructions, and sometimes how long the stop lasts. So before you ever answer that question, you need to know two things: what your legal obligation is in that state, and what typically happens next once the word gun enters the conversation. Because what feels like transparency to you can feel like heightened risk to the officer, and that difference in perception is where most escalations begin. Once a firearm is mentioned, something subtle but powerful shifts in the dynamics of the stop. It's not automatically hostility. It's not automatically suspicion of a crime. It's a shift in perceived risk. From the officer's point of view, they're standing roadside with an unknown person who has access, real or potential, to a deadly weapon. Even if you're calm, polite, and completely lawful, the equation in their mind changes instantly. Unknown person plus firearm equals elevated caution. That elevation triggers training. Training triggers procedure, and procedure often means control. Control can look like being asked to step out of the vehicle. It can mean being told to keep your hands higher or more visible. It can mean the officer saying they're going to temporarily secure the firearm for safety. None of that automatically means you're in legal trouble, but it does mean the interaction has escalated beyond a simple speeding conversation. Here's where it becomes legally significant. When officer safety enters the equation, the legal toolbox expands. During a lawful traffic stop, officers already have the authority to order drivers out of the vehicle. If they reasonably believe someone may be armed and dangerous, they can conduct a limited pat-down for weapons. They may also conduct a brief protective sweep of areas within immediate reach if they can articulate a safety concern. Notice that word, articulate. Later, in a report or in court, everything hinges on articulation. The driver appeared nervous. The driver was unusually calm. It was a high-crime area. The driver avoided eye contact. The driver made movements toward the center console. Some of these factors sound contradictory, and sometimes they are. But in legal analysis, seemingly innocent details can be stacked together under the umbrella of training and experience to justify further investigation. That's why your words matter. Every extra detail you volunteer becomes a potential brick in a narrative you never meant to help build. This is where most searches actually begin, not with dramatic probable cause, but with conversation. There are generally two main paths from a routine stop to a vehicle search. The first is consent. The second is building enough reasonable suspicion to extend the stop. Consent is by far the most common because it doesn't require probable cause. It only requires you to say yes or to say something that can be treated as yes. And officers are trained in social dynamics. You might hear, "You don't mind if I take a quick look, right?" Or, "If you've got nothing to hide, this shouldn't be a problem." That framing is powerful because it quietly shifts the burden onto you to prove your innocence. Most people want to appear cooperative. They want to show they're the good guy. They don't want to seem difficult. So they talk, they explain, they reassure, and in doing so, they often give either explicit consent or enough verbal cues that the officer feels justified in pushing further. Here's the hard truth. You don't talk your way out of a search. You talk your way into one. The more you explain, the more angles exist for follow-up questions. The more questions, the higher the chance of inconsistencies, real or perceived. And once inconsistencies appear, reasonable suspicion starts to form. If this is already changing how you think about traffic stops, take a second to subscribe to Immigration Monitor so you don't miss the practical tools most people only discover after something goes wrong. Because what we're about to get into next are the exact phrases that close off these escalation paths without escalating the encounter itself. The goal isn't to be combative. The goal is to be calm, brief, and legally precise. Now let's get practical, because this is where most people either protect themselves or accidentally open the door to a search. Once you've provided your license, registration, and insurance, and you've complied with any legal duty to disclose in your state, the stop often drifts into a more conversational mode. It may sound casual, it may even sound friendly. But understand this, many of the next questions are not about curiosity. They're about locking you into a narrative. One of the most common is, "Where are you coming from?" It sounds harmless. It feels harmless. But the purpose isn't location. It's consistency. If your answer changes later, even a little, that becomes something to note. If you hesitate, that can be noted. If your passenger gives a slightly different version, that can be noted. So what do you say? Calmly and respectfully, "I plead the fifth." You deliver it evenly. Not sarcastic, not dramatic, just steady. Some people worry that invoking the Fifth Amendment sounds aggressive. It isn't. It's a constitutional protection. And the officer who becomes irritated because you calmly assert a constitutional right is exactly the kind of officer you need that protection against. You're not refusing to identify yourself. You're not resisting. You're simply declining to answer investigative questions. Then comes the sharper question, is there anything illegal in the car? This is a dangerous one because it invites absolute certainty in a situation where certainty is risky. You may believe you know exactly what's in your vehicle, but you cannot control everything that has ever entered it. A friend could have left something behind. Something could have fallen between seats months ago. Trash could have been tossed through an open window in a parking lot. If you answer, "No, there's absolutely nothing illegal in here," and something, even something minor, is later found, now you're accused of lying. Instead, once again, "I plead the fifth." Same calm tone, same short delivery. The power here is consistency. You're not debating. You're not arguing. You're simply declining to create statements that could later be used against you. Now let's address the most manipulative phrasing of all. You wouldn't mind if I take a look, right? This question is deliberately structured so that either a yes or a no can be twisted. If you say, "No, I don't mind," that can be interpreted as consent. If you say yes, it can be interpreted as agreement. So instead of answering on their terms, you respond with clarity. "I do not consent to any searches." That sentence is clean. It's unambiguous. It's body cam proof. It doesn't attack the officer. It doesn't accuse. It simply sets your boundary. Once you've said it, you don't need to elaborate. If the officer presses, why not? Or, if you've got nothing to hide, you repeat calmly, "I do not consent to any searches." Broken record, same words, same tone. Another common escalation tactic is the canine reference, "I'll just call a dog." Here's what you need to understand. Officers generally cannot extend a completed traffic stop solely to wait for a K9 unit without separate reasonable suspicion. So how do they sometimes build that suspicion? Through your answers, your visible nervousness, your shifting explanations. The mention of a dog is often used as psychological leverage. Many people would rather avoid the inconvenience and say, "Fine, go ahead and search." But once again, you're trading short-term discomfort for long-term vulnerability. So if that line comes, you stay consistent. I do not consent to any searches. That's it. You don't debate K-9 law on the roadside. You don't argue timelines. You calmly preserve the issue for later. Then there's attitude bait, a raised voice, a sarcastic comment, a dismissive tone. Sometimes that's intentional, sometimes it's just personality. But the effect can be the same, to provoke you emotionally, because emotional drivers talk more, move more, and say things like, "Go ahead, I don't care." Those statements are gold in a report. Your advantage is composure, polite, calm, short, consistent. I plead the fifth. I do not consent to any searches. That's your toolkit. So let's condense this into your roadside handbook. If you carry, or even if you don't, but you want maximum protection. First, know which legal category your state falls into. Duty to inform if asked, or no duty to disclose. That determines your initial response to the weapons question. Second, when the officer approaches, keep your hands visible, ideally on the steering wheel. If it's dark, turn on your interior light. Third, narrate your movements before reaching anywhere. My registration is in the glove box. How would you like me to proceed? Fourth, if you're legally required to disclose a firearm, do it calmly and clearly, then stop talking. Don't volunteer extra details. Fifth, if you're asked for consent to search, I do not consent to any searches. Sixth, for investigative questions unrelated to the basic reason for the stop, I plead the fifth. And finally, if the stop seems to drag on beyond its original purpose, you can ask two simple clock reset questions. Am I being detained? And am I free to go? Those questions force clarity. If you're free to go, leave calmly. If you are being detained, remain calm and continue asserting your rights verbally, not physically. If you know someone who carries or someone who assumes that being polite is enough to protect them, share this with them. Most people don't learn these distinctions until after a preventable mistake. Now we need to talk about the most serious moment in this entire interaction, the moment where a firearm is physically involved. Everything we've discussed so far protects your legal position. What we're about to discuss protects your life. If you are carrying and the officer decides they want to secure the firearm for safety, your ego cannot be involved. Your pride cannot be involved. Your political beliefs cannot be involved. This is about survival. Never handle a firearm in the presence of an officer during a stop. Ever. Not even if you're trying to be helpful. Not even if they say, "Just hand it to me." Not even if you're sure you can do it safely. In that moment, the risk calculation is completely different for the officer than it is for you. From their perspective, they are watching someone reach toward a weapon. Adrenaline is high. Reaction times are compressed. Misinterpretations happen in fractions of a second. And when a firearm is in motion, the legal standard almost always favors the officer under the doctrine of officer safety. If something goes wrong in that split second, you do not get the benefit of the doubt. So here is the correct way to handle it. If you are required to disclose and you've informed the officer that you're carrying, and they ask where the firearm is located, tell them clearly and specifically without moving your hands toward it. It's on my right hip. It's in the center console. It's in the glove compartment. Keep your hands visible the entire time. If they say, "Hand it to me," your response should be calm and steady. "Officer, I'm not comfortable touching the firearm in your presence. I'll keep my hands visible. You're welcome to secure it." That statement does three things. It communicates cooperation, it avoids sudden movement, and it transfers control of the weapon to the officer in a way that aligns with their safety training. Hands up or on the wheel. Fingers spread. No sudden gestures. Let them retrieve it. Do not narrate excessively. Do not reach to help. This is one of those rare moments where doing less is doing more. And you need to understand something very clearly. The roadside is not where constitutional battles are won. It's where misunderstandings escalate quickly. If an officer improperly secures your firearm, unloads it incorrectly, scratches it, or mishandles it, that is a courtroom or complaint process issue later. It is not a roadside confrontation issue, because the second you start physically intervening in how an officer is handling a weapon during a stop, you've introduced physical resistance into a situation that was verbal. That shift is dangerous. Now, let's zoom out and address what not to do overall, because sometimes avoiding mistakes is just as important as knowing what to say. Do not try to be funny. Yes, people love telling stories about how they joked their way out of a ticket. That's a gamble, not a strategy. Humor relies on shared perception, and you do not control how your tone is received, especially when stress is involved. Do not try to impress the officer with how much law you know. There is nothing to be gained by proving you've watched 100 constitutional videos. It rarely helps you, and it often annoys the person who has a lot of discretion over how the stop goes. Do not escalate your volume. If the officer raises their voice, you lower yours. If they speak quickly, you slow down. Emotional contrast works in your favor later if anything is reviewed. Calm looks credible. Chaos looks suspicious. Do not volunteer extra details in an attempt to appear transparent. Transparency without strategy is exposure. If you are not legally required to disclose a firearm in your state, do not treat disclosure as a badge of honor. Lawful silence is not deception. It is a right. And finally, do not physically resist while verbally asserting your rights. That combination destroys your position. The formula is simple. Comply physically, assert rights verbally, over and over. Because when you strip all of this down, remove the politics, the emotion, the internet debates, you're left with a very simple objective. Get through the encounter safely, protect your legal position, and avoid giving away leverage you don't have to give. Before we close this out, there's one more layer that matters more than any single sentence you memorize, and that's personal responsibility. Laws vary by state. They vary by permit status. They change over time. A strategy that protects you in one jurisdiction may create problems in another if you don't understand the disclosure requirements. That means it is your responsibility to know which category your state falls into. Duty to inform if asked, or no duty to disclose. It also means understanding that this video is education, not individualized legal advice. If you carry regularly, you should know a qualified attorney in your state before you ever need one, not after something goes wrong. The worst time to start researching your rights is when you're already in handcuffs or standing beside your vehicle watching it get searched. Preparation is quiet. It happens long before the flashing lights. And now, let's bring this full circle. Go back to that opening moment. You're driving. The lights come on. You pull over safely. Interior light on, hands visible, breathing steady. The officer approaches. You provide your license, registration, proof of insurance. You comply with whatever your state legally requires regarding disclosure. And then the question comes, any weapons in the vehicle? This time, you don't panic. You don't overshare. You don't try to prove you're one of the good ones. You answer according to your legal obligation. Nothing more, nothing less. If further investigative questions begin, you respond calmly. I plead the fifth. If consent to search is requested, I do not consent to any searches. If the firearm needs to be secured, I'm not comfortable touching it. You're welcome to secure it. Hands visible. Movements slow, tone even. Notice what's missing in that version of the story. No arguing, no sarcasm, no emotional spike, no volunteering unnecessary details. You are boring, predictable, controlled, and that is exactly what protects you. Because the side of the road is not where you win your case. It's where you avoid building one against yourself. Every extra sentence is a potential brick. Every unnecessary explanation is a potential extension of the stop. Silence, used correctly, is not suspicious. It is strategic. So here's the mindset shift I want you to carry with you from now on. You do not owe roadside conversations beyond what the law requires. You do not have to perform cooperation. You do not have to convince anyone of your innocence. Your job is simple. Comply physically, assert your rights verbally, and survive the encounter safely. If you remember nothing else, remember this. Calm voice, clear boundaries, consistent phrases. And when it comes to investigative questions that go beyond the reason for the stop, exercise your constitutional protection without apology. Because at the end of the day, rights only protect the people who use them. And when that question comes, you'll know exactly what to do and what not to say.